land. When I first took him by the hand was in ignorantatio ignoramus. His education had been much neglected. However, he improved greatly, and to judge from the astonishing progress he made, he would have been a general of the first class. He had great experience in war. He had been in 54 pitched battles and in 300 combats of different kinds. He was a man of uncommon bravery, cool in the midst of fire, and possessed of a clear, penetrating eye, ready to take advantage of any opportunity which might present itself. Violent and hasty in his expressions, sometimes even in my presence, he was ardently attached to me. In the midst of his anger, he would not suffer any person to join him in his remarks. On that account, when he was in a choleric mode, it was dangerous to speak to him, as he used to come to me in his rage and say that such and such persons were not to be trusted. As a general, he was greatly superior to Moreau or to Soult. Massena, said he, was a man of superior talent. He generally, however, made bad dispositions previous to a battle, and it was not until the dead began to fall about him that he began to act with that judgment which he ought to have displayed before. In the midst of the dying and the dead, a ball sweeping away those who encircled him, then Massena was himself, gave his orders, and made his dispositions with the greatest sang-froid and judgment. This is la vera nobilita de sang. It was truly said of Massena that he never began to act with judgment until the battle was going against him. He was, however, un voleur, a robber. He went halves along with the contractors and commissaries of the army. I signified to him often that if he would discontinue his speculations, I would make him a present of 800,000 or 1,000,000 of francs, but he had acquired such a habit that he could not keep his hands from money. On this account, he was hated by the soldiers, who mutinied against him 3 or 4 times. However, considering the circumstances of the times, he was precious, and had not his bright parts been soiled with the vice of avarice, he would have been a great man. Pichegru, continued Napoleon, was répétiteur, private teacher at Brienne, and instructed me in mathematics when I was about 10 years old. He possessed considerable knowledge in that science. As a general, Pichegru was a man of no ordinary talent, far superior to Moreau, although he had never done anything extraordinarily great, as the success of the campaigns in Holland was in great measure owing to the Battle of Fleurus. Pichegru, after he had united himself to the Bourbons, sacrificed the lives of upwards of 20,000 of his soldiers by throwing them purposely into the enemy's hands, whom he had informed beforehand of his intentions. He had a dispute once with Kleber at a time when, instead of marching his army upon Mayence, as he ought to have done, he marched the greatest part of them to another point where Kleber observed that it would only be necessary to send the ambulances with a few men to make a show. At that time, it was thought to be imbecility, but afterwards it was discovered to be treachery. One of Pichegru's projects was for Louis to come and join the army under his command and to cause himself to be proclaimed king. In order to ensure success, he signified to Louis that it was necessary for him to bring a large sum of money, as he said that Vive le Roi lay at the bottom of the gosier, and that it would require a great quantity of wine to bring it out of the mouth. If Louis had come, continued he would have been shot. Sir Hudson Lowe came up to Longwood and observed to me that General Bonaparte had adopted a very bad mode of procedure by, in a manner, declaring war against him, Sir Hudson, when he was the only person who had it in his power to render him a service or to make his situation comfortable. Countless causes had, he said, much altered his opinion concerning him since the intercourse they had together, and no longer looked upon him in the light of an arbitrary arbitrary tyrant who did everything to annoy them, which change of opinion the count had signified to him, and had confessed that they had presented everything to General Bonaparte par un voile de sang, through a bloody veil, that I had better try to remove any false impressions under which General Bonaparte might labor. He then asked me if I had ever signified to General Bonaparte that the French who were with him only wanted to make an instrument of him to aggrandize themselves, without caring by what means they effected it. I replied that certainly I never had signified anything of the kind to him, but that I had always labored to undeceive him whenever I perceived that he was misinformed. Sir Hudson Lowe said that the ministers would hold me in some degree accountable, that General Bonaparte was correctly informed of everything, and that no false colorings, misrepresentations, or malicious constructions were put upon what was done. His Excellency then made some remarks upon General Bonaparte constantly confining himself to his room, and asked what I supposed would induce him to go out. I replied an enlargement of his boundaries, taking off some of the restrictions and giving him a house at the other side of the island, that he had frequently complained that he could not walk out at Longwood without getting a pain in his head from the sun, as there was no shade, or if the rays of the sun were obscured, his cheek got inflamed, or a catarrh was produced by the sharp wind blowing over an elevated spot without shelter. I observed also that the allowance of provisions was totally insufficient, as the French laid out 7 or 8 pounds a day in articles which were indispensable, which I enumerated. Sir Hudson Lowe answered that with respect to this last, he had exceeded by 1/2 what was allowed by the ministers who were answerable to Parliament, that the expenses of Longwood did not exceed £8,000 per annum, and that perhaps he, Sir Hudson, might be obliged hereafter to pay the surplus out of his own salary, that his instructions were much more rigid than those of his predecessor. But unfortunately, General Bonaparte had thought that he had come out furnished with instructions of a much more lenient nature than those of the admiral, when the fact was directly the reverse, and all of his actions had been misconstrued and misrepresented, and malicious constructions put upon them, that the British government did not wish to render General Bonaparte's existence miserable or to torture him, that it was not so much himself, Bonaparte, they were afraid of, but that turbulent and disaffected people in Europe would make use of his name and influence to excite rebellion and disturbances in France and elsewhere in order to aggrandize themselves and otherwise answer their own purposes. Also that Las Casas was very well treated and wanted for nothing. This he desired I would communicate to General Bonaparte. I communicated some of those remarks to the governors to Napoleon, who replied, I do not believe that he acts according to his instructions, or if he does, he has disgraced himself by accepting a dishonorable employment, a government 2,000 leagues off and ignorant of the localities of the island can never give orders in detail, that they can only give general and discretionary ones. They have only directed him to adopt every measure he thinks necessary to prevent my escape. Instead of that, I am treated in a manner dishonorable to humanity. To kill and bury a man is well understood, but this slow torture, this killing in detail, is much less humane than if they ordered me to be shot at once. I've often heard, continued he, of the tyranny and oppression practiced in your colonies, but I never thought that there could exist such violations of law and of justice as are practiced here. From what I have seen of you English, I think there is not a nation on earth more enslaved, as I told Colonel Wilkes, the former governor of this island. Here I observed that I begged of him not to form his opinion of the English nation by a little colony placed under peculiar circumstances and subject to military law, that to judge correctly of England one must be there, and there he would see how little a person with a brown or a black coat cared about the ministers. So said the old colonel, replied Napoleon, but I only speak of you, as I have seen you, and I find you to be the greatest slaves upon earth, all trembling with fear at the sight of that governor. There is Sir George Bingham, who is a well-disposed man, yet he is so much afraid that he will not come and see me, through fear that he might give umbrage to the governor. The rest of the officers run away at the sight of us. I observed that it was not fear but delicacy which prevented Sir George Bingham from coming, and that as to the other officers, they must obey the orders which they have received. Napoleon replied, if they were French officers, they would not be afraid of expressing their opinion as to the barbarity and the treatment pursued here, and a French general second in command would, if he saw his country dishonored in the manner yours is, write a complaint of it himself to his government. As to myself, continued he, I would never make a complaint if I did not know that were an inquiry demanded by the nation, your ministers would say he has never complained, and therefore he is conscious that he is well treated, and that there are no grounds for it. Otherwise, I should conceive it degrading to me to utter a word, though I am so disgusted with the conduct of this Sibero spy, that I should, with the greatest pleasure, receive the intimation that orders had arrived to shoot me. I should esteem it a blessing. I observed that Sir Hudson Lowe had professed himself very desirous to accommodate and arrange matters in an amicable manner. Napoleon replied, if he wishes to accommodate matters, let him put things upon the same footing they were during the time of Admiral Cockburn. Let no person be permitted to enter here for the purpose of seeing me without a letter from Bertrand. He does not like to give Bertrand liberty to pass people in. Let him make out a list himself of such persons to the island as he will allow to visit me, and send it to Bertrand, and let the latter have the power to grant them permission to enter and to write to them. When strangers arrive in like manner, let him make out a list of such persons as he will permit to see us, and during this stay let them be allowed to visit with Bertrand's pass. Perhaps I would see very few of them, as it is difficult to distinguish between those who come up to see me as they would a wild boar, and others who are actuated by motives of respect. But still, I should like to have the privilege. It is for him to accommodate if he likes. He has the power. I have none. I'm not governor. I have no places to give away. Let him take off his prohibitions, that I shall not quit the high road or speak to a lady if I meet one in a few words. Che si comporti bene verso di me. Let him behave well to me. If he does not choose to treat me like a man, che ha giocato un ruolo nel mondo con quel che ho giocato io. If he does not choose to treat me like a man who had played the part in life I have, let him not treat me worse than a galley slave or a condemned criminal, as those are not prohibited to speak. Let him do this, and then I will say that he acted at first inconsiderately through fear of my escaping, but that when he saw his error, he was not ashamed to alter his treatment. Then I will say that I formed a hasty opinion of him, that I have been mistaken. Ma siete un bambino dottore. You are a child doctor. You have too good an opinion of mankind. This is not sincere. I believe the opinion I first formed of him is correct, that he is a man whose natural badness is increased by suspicion and dread of the responsibility of the situation which he holds. C'est un homme rhéteur, abject tout à fait au-dessus de son emploi. He is an artful man, abject and entirely unworthy of his employment. I would wager my life, continued he, that if I sent for Sir George Bingham or the Admiral to ride out with me before I had gone out 3 times with either the one or the other, this governor would make some insinuations to them which would render me liable to be affronted by the refusing to accompany me any longer. He says that Lescazes is well treated and wants for nothing because he does not starve him. C'est un homme vraiment ignoble. He is indeed a base man. He degrades his own species pussies. He pays no attention to the moral wants which distinguish the man from the brute. He only looks to the physical and grosser ones, just as if Las Casas were a horse or an ass, and that a bundle of hay was sufficient to entitle him to say he's happy, because his belly was full, therefore all his wants were satisfied. Fifth, had a long conversation with the emperor in his bath, asked his opinion of Emperor Alexander. C'est un homme extrêmement faux, un grec du bas empire. He's a hypocritical man. A Greek of the lower empire, replied Napoleon. He is the only one of the three who had any talent. He is plausible, great dissimulator, very ambitious, and a man who studies to make himself popular. It is his foible to believe himself skilled in the art of war, and he likes nothing so well as to be complimented upon it, though everything that originated with him relative to military operations was ill-judged and absurd. Until said Alexander, the king of Prussia, used frequently to occupy themselves in contriving dresses for dragoons, debating upon what button the crosses of the orders ought to be hung, and such other fooleries. They fancied themselves on an equality with the best generals in Europe because they knew how many rows of buttons there were upon a dragoon's jacket. I could scarcely keep from laughing sometimes when I heard them discussing these collionnerie trifles with as much gravity and earnestness as if they were planning an impending action between 200,000 men. However, I encouraged them in their arguments, as I saw it was their weak point. We rode out every day together. The king of Prussia was un bête. It nous a tellement ennuyé, an idiot, and wearied us so that Alexander and myself frequently galloped away in order to get rid of him.